I sat at the kitchen table, looking around at the place that had been my home for so many years. The smell of dinner still hung in the air, but I had no appetite. Across from me sat Sally, my wife of 22 years. She avoided my eyes, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Brandon, I need to talk to you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Go ahead," I said, trying to sound calm. Sally took a deep breath. I want to experience something outside our marriage, just once. I need to know what it's like with someone else. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, stunned, my mind racing. How could this be happening? We had a good life together. 2 amazing kids, a beautiful home, and successful careers. How could she want to throw it all away? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I understand," I said, even though I didn't. "Not at all." "I need you to agree, Brandon," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to do this without your permission." I looked at her, trying to find the right words. "Why, Sally? Why do you feel you need this?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I feel like something is missing. I need to know if it's me or if it's us." My heart ached at her words. "We've been together for so long," I said softly. "We've built a life together. Why now?" Sally sighed. "I don't want to hurt you, Brandon, but I need to do this for myself." I felt a surge of anger. "What about us? What about our family? Does that mean nothing to you?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Of course it does, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "So you've already made up your mind?" She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I have." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The garden we had planted together, the swing set where our kids had played, the pool we had installed last summer. All of it seemed meaningless now. I turned back to her. "Who is it? Who's the guy?" She looked away, her silence giving me the answer. "It's someone from work, isn't it?" I pressed. Sally nodded. "His name is Stephen." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "Stephen, of course." She looked at me, pleading. "Please, Brandon, try to understand." I shook my head. I can't understand why you would want to do this to us." We sat in silence, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "I won't stop you, Sally. But if you go through with this, I don't know if we can come back from it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'm so sorry." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt a deep sadness settle over me. "I'm sorry, too," I said softly. As I walked out of the kitchen, I felt like a part of my world had just crumbled away. This was only the beginning, and I had no idea how we would get through it. But one thing was certain. Our lives would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up early. I hadn't slept much, tossing and turning all night. Sally's confession played over and over in my mind. I got out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake her, and went downstairs. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock in the living room. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Sally had dropped the bombshell the night before. The morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. After making a pot of coffee, I poured myself a cup and sat back down. My mind raced with questions. Why Stephen? How long had this been going on? I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. I knew I needed answers. Sally came downstairs a little while later. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from crying. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my coffee. She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around her own cup. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension between us almost unbearable. Finally, I spoke. "We need to talk." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I know. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sally took a deep breath. A few months. We started talking at work, then having lunch together. It just happened. Does he know you're married? I asked, feeling a surge of anger. Yes, she said quietly. He knows. I shook my head, trying to understand. So, you've been sneaking around behind my back for months. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. I never meant for it to get this far. It just happened. I'm so sorry, Brandon. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. I paced the kitchen, trying to process everything. Why Sally? Why him? She shrugged, wiping away a tear. I don't know. He made me feel special, like I mattered. I guess I felt like something was missing between us. I stopped pacing and looked at her. And you thought cheating on me would fill that void? She shook her head. No, I didn't think. I was lonely, Brandon. I needed something, and Stephen was there. I sat back down, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me. You could have talked to me, Sally. We could have worked on this together. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I understand more than you think. But now, I need you to be honest with me. Are you in love with him? She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I'm not. It was exciting, new. But I don't love him. I looked at her, trying to find the woman I married in her eyes. Do you still love me? Yes, she said without hesitation. I love you, Brandon. I don't want to lose you. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Then we need to figure this out. Together. Sally reached across the table and took my hand. I want to fix this, Brandon. I'll do whatever it takes. I squeezed her hand, feeling a mix of hope and fear. It's going to be hard, Sally. But if we both want this, we can get through it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Brandon. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said softly. But we have a long road ahead of us. We need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. She squeezed my hand tighter. I promise. No more secrets. We sat there, holding hands across the table, both of us knowing that this was just the beginning. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we had a chance. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, but the sunshine did nothing to lift the heavy cloud hanging over my heart. I had been up for hours, pacing the living room, trying to find the right words. Today was the day I had to make things clear to Sally. I took a deep breath and walked upstairs to our bedroom. Sally was still in bed, the sheets pulled up to her chin. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, she had confessed to wanting to cheat on me. Sally, I said softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. She stirred and opened her eyes, looking at me with a mix of sadness and confusion. Brandon, what time is it? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. It's early, I replied, but we need to talk. She sat up, pulling the sheets around her. Okay. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say. I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about Stephen, and I've come to a decision. She looked at me, fear in her eyes. What decision? I'm giving you an ultimatum, I said, my voice firm. You have two options. The first option is that you come with me to the beach house today. We spend the weekend there, just the two of us, and we try to work on our marriage. We talk, we listen, and we see if we can find a way to fix this. Sally's eyes widened. And the second option? The second option, I continued, is that you go through with your plans to meet Stephen at the Jefferson Hotel. But if you choose that option, our marriage is over. The moment I drive away from this house without you, we're done. She stared at me, her face pale. Brandon, I don't know what to say. I stood up, pacing the room. There's nothing to say, Sally. You just need to decide. Are you willing to fight for us, or do you want to throw everything away for one night with him? Tears filled her eyes. I don't want to lose you, Brandon. I love you. Then come with me, I said, stopping in front of her. Let's go to the beach house and try to fix this. But if you can't do that, if you need to be with him, then I need to know now. She wiped away her tears, her hands trembling. I'll go with you. I want to work on our marriage. Relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Okay, let's pack and get on the road. As we packed, the tension between us was palpable. Sally moved slowly, her movements mechanical. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the battle between her desire for something new and her commitment to our life together. Finally, we were ready to go. We loaded the car in silence, the weight of the ultimatum hanging over us. As I started the engine, I glanced at Sally. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. We're going to get through this, I said, trying to sound confident. One step at a time. She nodded, but didn't say anything. As we drove away from the house, I couldn't help but wonder if we were really on the path to healing, or if this was just the beginning of the end. The drive to the beach house was long and quiet. The radio played softly in the background, but neither of us spoke. My mind raced with thoughts of the weekend ahead. How would we start? What would we say? Could we really fix what was broken? When we finally arrived, I turned off the engine and took a deep breath. We're here, I said, breaking the silence. Sally nodded, but didn't move. I got out of the car and walked around to her side, opening the door. Come on, I said gently. Let's go inside. We carried our bags into the house, the familiar smell of the ocean filling the air. The beach house had always been a place of peace and happiness for us. I hoped it could be that way again. I set our bags down and turned to Sally. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. About everything. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I know. We sat down on the couch, facing each other. I need to know why, Sally, I said softly. Why, Stephen? Why now? She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. I felt like something was missing, Brandon. I needed to feel wanted, needed, and Stephen made me feel that way. But it was a mistake. I see that now. I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. We can't change the past, but we can work on the future, if we're both willing to try. I want to try, she said, her voice breaking. I love you, Brandon. I don't want to lose you. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I love you too, Sally, and I'm willing to fight for us. But we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. No more secrets. I promise. As we sat there, holding hands, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I believed we could find our way back to each other. We had a long road ahead, but we were ready to face it together. The weekend at the beach house had given us a small but significant start. It was Monday morning, and I felt a cautious sense of hope as I woke up. Sally was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and headed downstairs. The house was quiet, the morning light filtering through the curtains. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, thinking about the steps we needed to take. If we were going to fix our marriage, we had to be prepared for anything. Sally came downstairs a little while later, her hair still tousled from sleep. She gave me a small smile, and I felt a warmth in my chest. Morning, she said softly. Morning, I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. We need to talk about what comes next. She nodded, taking the seat across from me. I know. I took a deep breath. I think we should see a marriage counselor. We need someone to help us work through this. Sally looked thoughtful. I agree. Do you have anyone in mind? I've heard good things about Dr. Lewis. She specializes in couples therapy. I can give her office a call today. Sally nodded. That sounds like a good idea. I reached across the table and took her hand. "We're going to get through this, Sally, one step at a time." She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready, Brandon. I want to do whatever it takes." After breakfast, I made the call to Dr. Lewis' office and scheduled an appointment for later that week. With that done, I knew there were other practical steps I needed to take. I had to be prepared for any outcome. I walked through the house, making a mental inventory of our belongings. I took out my phone and started photographing each room, making sure to capture everything of value. If things didn't work out, I wanted to be ready. Sally watched me from the doorway, a concerned look on her face. "What are you doing?" "I'm just being prepared," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to make sure we have a record of everything, just in case." She nodded slowly. "I understand, but it feels so final." I turned to her, feeling a pang of guilt. "I don't want it to be, Sally. I'm just trying to be realistic." She walked over and wrapped her arms around me. "I know. It's just hard to think about." I held her close, feeling the weight of our situation. "We're going to be okay," I said softly. "We just have to take it one day at a time." Later that morning, I went to the bank and opened a new checking account. I moved half of our joint funds into it, wanting to make sure I had access to money if things went south. It felt like a betrayal, but I knew I had to protect myself. I also sent a direct deposit change form to my company's HR department. As I filled out the paperwork, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. This wasn't how I imagined our life together would be. When I got home, Sally was sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red from crying. "I found our wedding album," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you remember this day?" I sat down beside her, looking at the photos. "Of course I do. It was the happiest day of my life." She smiled sadly. "Mine too. I want us to be that happy again, Brandon." I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "We will be, Sally. We just have to work at it." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm willing to try." That evening, we sat down together and made a list of things we needed to do. It felt good to have a plan, to know we were taking concrete steps to fix our marriage. We talked about finding a support group, spending more quality time together, and making sure we communicated openly and honestly. As we went to bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. We were facing a difficult journey, but we were facing it together, and that gave me hope. Lying in bed, I held Sally close, feeling her warmth against me. "We're going to be okay," I whispered. She snuggled closer, her breathing steady. "I believe you," she murmured. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it too. Tuesday morning dawned with a heavy rain tapping against the windows. It mirrored the turmoil inside me as I faced another day of uncertainty. Sally and I had made strides over the weekend, but the reality of our situation still loomed large. Sally was already up, standing by the kitchen sink with a cup of coffee in her hand. She turned as I entered, giving me a small, tired smile. "Morning." "Morning," I replied, joining her by the sink. "Did you sleep well?" She shrugged. "Better than before, but still not great." I nodded, understanding all too well. "We have our first session with Dr. Lewis tomorrow," I said, trying to sound positive. "I think it will help." "I hope so," she replied, her voice tinged with worry. We sat down at the table, and I took her hand in mine. "Sally, I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we need to do to really move forward." She looked at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I think we need to make some hard decisions," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Not just about our marriage, but about everything. Our priorities, our goals, what we want from life." She bit her lip, clearly anxious. "Like what?" "Like your job," I said gently. "I know it's important to you, but I think it's part of what's driving us apart. The long hours, the travel, the distance it's creating between us." Sally looked down at her coffee, her expression conflicted. I love my job, Brandon. It's a big part of who I am. I know, I said, squeezing her hand. But I love you, and I want us to have a real chance at fixing this. Maybe it's time to consider a change. She was silent for a long moment, then finally looked up at me. You're right. I've been so focused on my career that I've let our marriage slip. I'll talk to my boss about reducing my hours or finding a different position. I felt a surge of relief. Thank you, Sally. It means a lot to me that you're willing to make that sacrifice. I want us to work, Brandon, she said, her voice firm. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We spent the rest of the morning talking about our future, making plans and setting goals. It felt good to be on the same page, to be working together for the first time in a long time. That afternoon, I decided to tackle another important task. I called my lawyer, Lauren Taylor, to set up a meeting. It was time to put some legal protections in place, just in case things didn't go as planned. When I arrived at Lauren's office, she greeted me with a warm smile. Good to see you, Brandon. How are things going? I sighed, taking a seat across from her desk. Better, I think. Sally and I are trying to work things out, but I need to be prepared for any outcome. She nodded, understanding. That's smart. Let's go over the details of what you need. We spent the next hour discussing my options, from updating our will to setting up a trust for our kids. It was a sobering conversation, but it gave me a sense of control over a situation that often felt out of my hands. As I was leaving, Lauren touched my arm. Brandon, I know this is tough, but you're doing the right thing. Being prepared is never a bad idea. Thanks, Lauren, I said, appreciating her support. I just want to do what's best for my family. When I got home, Sally was waiting for me. She looked nervous, wringing her hands. Brandon, there's something I need to tell you. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I talked to my boss, she said, taking a deep breath. I asked for a transfer to a less demanding position. It will mean a pay cut, but it will give me more time at home. More time with you. I felt a rush of gratitude and pulled her into a hug. Thank you, Sally. That means so much to me. She hugged me back, holding on tightly. I'm committed to making this work, Brandon. I don't want to lose you. I pulled back and looked into her eyes. We're going to get through this. Together. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a flicker of hope. We had made some hard decisions, but they were the right ones. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly on the path to healing. The road ahead would still be challenging, but I knew we were both willing to put in the effort. And that made all the difference. The drive to the beach house was quiet. The rhythm of the tires on the road and the gentle hum of the engine were the only sounds that filled the car. Sally sat beside me, staring out the window. Her mind seemed to be miles away. As we got closer, the familiar scent of the ocean drifted through the open windows. The beach house had always been our sanctuary, a place where we could escape from the world and just be ourselves. I hoped it could be that for us again. When we pulled into the driveway, I turned off the engine and took a deep breath. We're here. Sally nodded, her expression unreadable. It looks the same, she said softly, as if she had expected it to change. Yeah, it does, I replied, opening the car door. Let's get inside. We unloaded the car in silence, each of us carrying bags filled with clothes and memories. Once inside, I set our things down and took a moment to look around. The place felt different somehow, as if it knew the weight of the conversations we were about to have. I turned to Sally. Do you want to go for a walk on the beach? It might help clear our heads. She nodded. That sounds good. We walked out the back door and headed towards the shoreline. The sand was cool under our feet, and the sound of the waves was soothing. We walked in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Sally spoke. Brandon, I'm scared. I looked at her, surprised by her honesty. Me too, I admitted, but we have to face this if we want to move forward. She stopped walking and turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you really think we can fix this?" I reached out and took her hand. "I do. But it's going to take time and effort from both of us." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I'm willing to try." We continued walking, the waves washing over our feet. It felt good to be outside, away from the tension of the house. As we walked, we talked about our hopes and fears, about what had gone wrong, and how we could make things right. When we got back to the house, the sun was starting to set. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the air was cool. We sat on the porch, watching the waves roll in. "I miss this," Sally said quietly. "Being here with you." "Me too," I replied, putting my arm around her. "We need to make more time for this, for us." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I want that too." We sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the moment. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Later, we went inside and made dinner together. It was a simple meal, but it felt like a small victory. We talked about our plans for the future, about how we could make more time for each other and our family. After dinner, we cleaned up and settled on the couch. The sound of the waves filled the room, a gentle reminder of where we were. "Sally," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want to ask you something." "Okay," she replied, looking at me. "Do you still think about Stephen?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. She sighed, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But it's not what you think. I don't want to be with him. I think about what I did, how I hurt you, and I feel guilty." I took her hand in mine. "We all make mistakes, Sally. What matters is what we do to make things right." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I want to make things right, Brandon. I want to be the wife you deserve." I squeezed her hand. "And I want to be the husband you need. We're in this together." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Together. As we sat there, the sound of the waves in the background, I felt a sense of hope. The beach house had always been a place of healing for us, and I believed it could be that way again. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the right path. We spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and just being together. It felt good to reconnect, to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. As we headed to bed that night, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. Lying in bed, with Sally by my side, I knew we still had a lot of work to do. But I also knew that we were committed to making it work. And that gave me hope for the future. The weeks following our weekend at the beach house were filled with hard work and emotional conversations. We started seeing Dr. Lewis, our marriage counselor, and those sessions became a lifeline. It wasn't easy, but each time we left her office, I felt a little more hopeful. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Sally and I sat in the living room, a silence hanging between us. The kids were out, giving us some much-needed alone time. Sally broke the silence. "Brandon, I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we need to do to really move forward." I nodded, knowing this was going to be another important conversation. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, looking at me with a mixture of fear and determination. "I think we need to create new memories, something just for us. A fresh start." I considered her words. "What do you mean?" "We've been through so much," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We need to find a way to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. Maybe we should plan a trip, just the two of us, somewhere we've never been." I felt a warmth spread through me. "I like that idea. Where do you want to go?" Sally's face lit up. "I've always wanted to visit the mountains. Maybe a cabin in the woods, somewhere quiet where we can just be together." "That sounds perfect," I said, smiling. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, we planned our trip. It felt good to have something to look forward to. a chance to create new memories. We booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a secluded spot where we could focus on each other. The drive to the cabin was filled with light conversation and shared anticipation. As we wound our way up the mountain roads, I felt a sense of excitement building. This trip felt like a new beginning. When we arrived, the cabin was even more beautiful than the pictures had shown. It was nestled among tall trees, with a view of the mountains that took our breath away. "This is amazing," Sally said, her eyes wide with wonder. I took her hand. "I'm glad you like it." We spent the first day exploring the area, hiking through the woods and taking in the stunning views. It felt good to be outside, away from the stress and noise of everyday life. That evening, we built a fire in the fireplace and settled on the couch with a bottle of wine. The warmth of the fire and the coziness of the cabin made it easy to relax. "Brandon," Sally said, her voice soft, "I want to thank you for being so patient with me. I know I've put you through a lot." I reached out and took her hand. "We've both been through a lot, but we're here now, and that's what matters." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I love you, Brandon. I never stopped loving you." "I love you too, Sally," I said, feeling the emotion in my own voice. "We've come a long way, and we still have work to do, but I believe in us." She leaned in and kissed me, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of healing and hope. As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The next few days were filled with laughter and connection. We talked about our dreams and fears, about the future we wanted to build together. Each conversation brought us closer, strengthening the bond that had been so fragile. On our last night at the cabin, we sat on the porch, watching the stars. The night was clear and still, the perfect backdrop for our reflections. "Sally," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want us to promise each other something." She turned to me, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "What is it?" "I want us to promise to always be honest with each other," I said. "No more secrets, no more hiding our feelings. If something's wrong, we talk about it." She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I promise, Brandon. No more secrets." I took her hand in mine. "And I promise to always listen, to always be there for you. We're in this together." She squeezed my hand, her smile widening. Together. As we sat there, under the vast expanse of the night sky, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had faced our darkest moments and come out stronger. Our journey wasn't over, but we were on the right path. The trip to the mountains had given us the fresh start we needed. It was a reminder that, despite everything, our love was still strong. And with that love, we could face anything. We returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. We continued our counseling sessions, committed to the hard work of rebuilding our marriage. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and connection. As the weeks turned into months, I realized that our reconciliation was not a destination but a journey. It was a continuous process of learning, forgiving, and loving. And as long as we were willing to walk that path together, I knew we would be okay.